This episode contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes which may be disturbing to some listeners.
This week on APB Cold Case, we're bringing you a special Behind the Badge episode. We're taking you inside the story of the worst bioterrorism attack in U.S. history.
This is APB Behind the Badge. Here's your host, former police chief Mark Spahn.
Our story begins at the iconic Rockefeller Plaza building in New York City. It's September 2001, just days after the terror attacks on 9/11. New York City is still reeling, and the country's in shock, mourning the catastrophic loss and preparing for war. The skies over New York City that fall were filled with scattered clouds, often masking the smoke from the still smoldering debris at Ground Zero. About 5 miles away from the mangled wreckage of the World Trade Center, employees of NBC Nightly News at 30 Rockefeller Plaza were busier than ever with another day of round-the-clock reporting of the terrorist attacks. According to an article at NBCnews.com, a desk assistant charged with opening mail addressed to anchor Tom Brokaw noticed something strange. It was a letter that appeared to have been written by a child, and it contained a granular substance, something she'd never seen before. She made a mental note of it and continued on with her day. But there was something about the letter that stuck with her. It was odd enough that she mentioned it to friends. That letter, along with other mail, would go on to be handled by Brokaw's assistant and several others. No one knew it at the time, but America was under attack yet again, but this time by an unseen enemy. Ultimately, it would be learned that in September and October of 2001, at least 5 letters tainted with anthrax were mailed to people across the United States, including U.S. Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy in Washington, D.C., Tom Brokaw in the New York Post in New York City, and a media organization in Boca Raton, Florida. Each envelope also contained a photocopy of a threatening handwritten note. The first victim was Robert Stevens, a newspaper photo editor in Florida. He died on October 5th from inhalation anthrax. Once the first victim was identified, the FBI began its investigation through several field offices, including what would become the lead office, Washington, D.C. The probe into the origins of the anthrax letters was underway. One of the most complex and intensive investigations in U.S. history. Its code name? Amerithrax. It's important to paint a picture of what was going on in the world before the terror attacks of 9/11. Some of you lived through that time, but others have only heard about it. There was the 1993 bombing in the underground parking garage at the World Trade Center where 6 people were killed. And then the 1995 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City that killed 168 people, including 19 children. Both incidents signaled a wake-up call for Americans. Domestic and foreign terrorists were attacking our American homeland. And then, the 1995 sarin gas attack in a Tokyo subway that killed 13 and injured more than 6,000 underscored the magnitude and the widespread impact of a potential biohazard attack on U.S. soil. So, in the months leading up to September 11, 2001, the U.S. Capitol Police were already considering the precautions they needed to take to protect their top government leaders from future threats. At the time, Edward Bailor was a captain with the U.S. Capitol Police, and he was put in charge of developing procedures and cultivating a team to handle any potential biological or chemical weapons of mass destruction.
And myself and the chief, we decided if we were going to do it, we got to do it ourselves. So I trained up 160 guys. And we started out in secret, and we would train off campus, and we would have our exercises in the middle of the night, so when no one was around in the Capitol. Certain things that I really can't discuss to protect the leadership of our government, to include the president, the vice president, the Supreme Court justices, and the leadership of the House and Senate. This team that I developed, we had my level A guys, which is, if you see the guys in the moon suits, I had set up my team that they were going to be the responders who went into the hot zone. They would go in, they would bring out and do the testing to figure out what it was. So we did this, we had this program go on, and we called it the ALERT team, ALERT, Advanced Law Enforcement Response Team. We were the first police hazmat team in the country, and we were doing 3-4 white powder runs a day.
Those white powder runs were calls that the Capitol Police received when someone would detect something suspicious, a dust or a powder that could potentially be anthrax or some other biochemical hazard. So it was around September 19, 2001, 8 days after the 9/11 attacks, and around the same time that the anthrax letter addressed to Tom Brokaw was received at NBC News. Tensions were high in government sectors, and especially around the Capitol, where cautious politicians and staffers were on the lookout for anything odd. But people became scared, and everything started to look suspicious.
As soon as people start learning about anthrax, everything, white powder, coffee creamer, everything was driving responders around the country crazy, whether they were fire, police, or EMS guys. They were doing the same response we were.
Captain Bailor's team had been doing their training and preparations in secret, but it wasn't long before their work was noticed.
A few weeks before 9/11, we were, I would like to say we were outed so that other agencies in DC knew that we were having our team, and we started training other police departments, the Metropolitan Police, and whoever wanted to come. If we were doing, when you do a major thing, you need major people. So it helped me with having a big exercises and being able to make things work.
It's Monday, October 15, 2001, just over a month since the 9/11 attacks. Another day begins in Washington. Since the terrorist attacks, Capitol Police have fortified the perimeters around sensitive government buildings. And they continue to handle calls of suspicious mail since the discovery of anthrax letters in New York a couple weeks before. A call comes in to the U.S. Capitol Police from the Hart Senate Office Building. A staffer in Senator Tom Daschle's office had opened a piece of mail containing loose powder. Here's Ed Bailor.
And I get a call from one of my level A guys. His name was Snooky Woods. And he calls me up and he says, "Captain, we're pregnant." And so testing for anthrax and other biological agents is done through a PCR, like a pregnancy kit. You mix up the solution, mix the batch, take the eyedropper, put it in there just like a pregnancy kit. And if it turns pink, it's positive for a specific agent. And so it says we're pregnant, which is telling me that we have anthrax. And I go, "Oh my God, Snooky, what are you talking about?" He says, "I'm up in the Daschle suite and our tests come back positive." Now we've done 10,000 of these things. And all of a sudden we get a first positive.
The sample is tested again using a solution from a different batch of test kits. And again, it comes back positive. Captain Bailor begins a notification process while at the same time setting up a perimeter around the contaminated hot zone. They were still securing the scene when he looked out a window.
And I look in the glass because the Senate office buildings were glass, and I look into the glass and I see President Bush with Senator Daschle making a national broadcast that Daschle was hit with anthrax. And I'm still stringing the biohazard tape so fast. I mean, we're talking minutes.
Captain Bailor and his team had barely arrived on the scene to secure the area, and a presidential press conference is already happening.
This thing just went wild. And oh my gosh, people were running in the halls. It just turned, every staff member's watching, they watch CNN, they got 4 or 5 TVs going. Well, they're all watching. There's the president say we've been hit with, the first biological attack in our country.
Officer Snooky Woods did another test, this time on the actual powder.
There's a special solution. You dip a Q-tip with cotton on the end, and you rub it in like an S pattern in 2 different directions where you think the powder might be. It's called swabbing. And you take that and put it in the pregnancy kit, shake it up, and it usually takes anywhere from 12 to 18 minutes for it to turn pink. And so there was such a pile there. Snooky stuck it right into it. In like a minute, it turned red, not pink, it turned red. Immediately, like a minute. That's how powerful it was. Investigation later, they say it was probably 3 trillion spores of anthrax.
The potency of this particular strain of anthrax made it an even bigger threat. Ed Bailor explained the path of the letter and how it was routed through the Trenton, New Jersey distribution center and the Brentwood Postal Facility in D.C.
That letter had come in from a mailbox that we believe came in from a mailbox up in New Jersey. This anthrax was so finely milled by the culprit that it was able to penetrate through the holes in the envelope. And what happened? When that letter left, it went through all the stations, came down to Brentwood Post Office, went through their sorting machines, and they go, the mail's going down the chute. What happens when it goes down the chute? It is compressing that envelope and it's puffing it. So there was people days later at the Brentwood facility was sick and dying. That letter left Brentwood, came in through the tunnel and goes into the Senate mailbox in the Hart basement. It's taken out of there in the mail bags and it is sorted by Senator Daschle, Senator Kennedy. Then what they do is they put it in a machine and it puts a wrap around it. And when it puts a wrap around, of course, it squeezes that envelope again. And so now that room is contaminated. The bags were contaminated. The push cart is contaminated. He's going up through the hallways, it's contaminated.
Bailor orders testing on the floors above and below Senator Daschle's suite.
So they go down there. It's about a 15-minute test. Positive, Captain. Go down below. Positive, Captain. So I get some more guys and I send them up. The Hart building is divided into 4. There's 4 HVAC chambers. When I got the first hit, there's a special thing that I could do to shut down the HVAC system that I did in a few minutes after I was told. The problem was the letter was sitting there for a while before he opened it, before he called the police. By the time he responded, finally tested. The building's HVAC system, in like 7-8 minutes, it turns over all the air in the building. That's how big the HVAC handling system was. And so the building was contaminated. So I said, go up there and test. So they go up into the HVAC filtering system and they swab it. Positive. So that whole quadrant is contaminated. I said, okay, test the other 3. Positive, positive, positive. The whole building is contaminated.
So anthrax spores are now airborne in the building and could easily be carried away on people's clothes, shoes, and other items. And once the spores are on you, you can carry them to your home or to the grocery store or on the subway. It only takes a small amount of anthrax to infect a large number of people.
My co-workers, the policemen were afraid. As you can imagine, it's like if you're in a dangerous situation, you can see and feel the danger, but this is something you couldn't see.
The Hart Senate office building is shut down, and they begin an evacuation. Captain Bailor said that a lot of people were scared, but there was one person who, surprisingly, was very calm.
So Snooky is also in a hazardous zone, and the people are yelling at each other in the office because they're scared. They're not allowed to leave, and it's a little chaos going on. The most calm person was the person who opened up the mail that the stuff fell out of.
Some of the Senate staff had recently attended an introductory class on weapons of mass destruction taught by Ed Bailor's sergeants, where they learned how to respond to white powder threats.
And that person went to the class, knew exactly what to do, and so he wasn't afraid. He knew that it wasn't going to kill him right away.
According to the CDC, the most common kind of exposure is cutaneous anthrax, when spores get into the skin through a cut or a scrape. And then there's inhalation anthrax, the most serious form, which can be fatal. But for people exposed to anthrax, certain antibiotics can be used to prevent illness from developing. Patients with serious cases of anthrax need to be hospitalized. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, attention was now concentrated on treating people who were exposed and decontaminating the building.
That process to clean one of the largest buildings in Washington, 50 Senate offices in there, to clean that building, early on, there was talk of just demolishing the whole building, that you'll never get it clean. So the smart people in our country who handle this, they decided what they were going to do is they were going to clean the building by the process of chlorinating it. First of all, they developed a thing called a chlorine dioxide generator. And what they had to do is they had to get chlorine from a liquid into a gas at a certain temperature in a building that was now cold, very cold, because now it's pert near winter, that there's been no heat in the building for a long time. They had to have that chlorine at a certain temperature. So they had to heat it up to get it in the building. If it was too high of a mixture with a certain temperature, it's an explosive. We did that for quite a few nights and then a couple days to make sure that it would all work. And it took months and months to get this thing set up. And what we did was we then went in and vacuumed like everything you could possibly vacuum in this humongous building. So you know why it took so many months. So they vacuumed everything. Then what they did was they got these humongous fans to aerosolate it up. And then when they did that, to get it from all the hiding places, so to speak, then they vacuumed again. And then they came through and they were testing. When they were tested, we're still getting positives.
While Captain Bailor and the U.S. Capitol Police are dealing with security, testing, and decontamination concerns at the Hart Senate Office building, an investigation is underway to determine who sent the anthrax letters to senators at the Hart building in D.C. and media outlets in New York and Florida. The Amerithrax Task Force began what would become one of the largest and most complex investigations in U.S. history.
Jim Rice from the FBI, he came to one of my classes when I started up my hazmat team. And he went to this class and he went back to the FBI. Well, they made him the director of hazmat for the FBI. And so he and I became friends. We did a lot of stuff together. And then all of a sudden this happens. He takes over the crime scene and starts the investigation going on.
Ed told me that the Capitol Police received offers of assistance from other parts of government.
And there were people there who were just jumping on top of each other for trying to give assistance and trying to help.
And then one day across the street from police headquarters was the Atlantic Strike Force of the U.S. Coast Guard. Captain Bailor was surprised to see the Coast Guard responding to the scene.
But they were really good and helped to set up a really fantastic incident command system that we started getting things under control using the Coast Guard incident command system.
So there's a lot happening. Capitol Police and hazardous materials crews are working on decontamination, at the same time keeping an eye on the health of their own staff. And the Amerithrax Task Force is going full speed on a criminal investigation. On November 9th, 2001, about 1 month after the anthrax letter was received in Senator Daschle's office, the FBI held a press briefing to talk about 3 of the anthrax letters. They needed observations from the public, so they provided a behavioral and linguistic analysis of the letters. The first 2 letters, to Tom Brokaw at NBC and the New York Post, were postmarked from Trenton, New Jersey on September 18, 2001, 1 week after the 9/11 attacks. The third letter, the one to Senator Daschle's office, was also postmarked from Trenton, but on October 9, 2001. The FBI highlighted the similarities between the 3 letters, how the author used dashes instead of slashes in the dates, used uppercase block letters. There was a downward slant in the handwriting from left to right, and the envelopes were pre-stamped and of a non-traditional size. Based on the evidence and the use of anthrax as the weapon of choice, The FBI profile said that the suspect would be an adult male who prefers to be by himself and who may work in a lab, have a scientific background. They said that the suspect would have access to anthrax and the expertise to refine it, and they'd have some familiarity with Trenton, New Jersey. They'd be non-confrontational and may hold grudges for a long time. The profile went on to say that the letter writer's post-offense behavior, things that they wanted the public to be alert for, could include significant behavioral changes, like an altered physical appearance, unusual interest in the media, mood swings, absenteeism, and altered sleeping and eating habits. Along with the suspect profile from the FBI, they also released pictures of the envelopes and notes. You can see all of those in our show notes. Captain Bailor said that those pictures caught the attention of the Speaker of the House.
And he goes, "Oh, I got the same one." And we said, "Well, where's your bag?" He said, "It's in my nut bag." He said, "What?" "Yeah, it's in my nut bag." "What is that?" "All the nuts who send me crazy letters. We throw it in the bag, and we have a closet in the office."
Bailor told me that a team evacuated the Speaker's mail to a special location where they set up tents in the night, going through 3 mailbags looking for any suspicious items and testing items as they went through them. Fortunately, no positive tests came from the bag. As the Anthrax Task Force investigation is moving along, there was a doctor who was a focus of investigators. He was ultimately cleared, so we're not going to mention his name here.
That's the guy that the government was focused on. They drain lakes out where he lives, community lakes, to look for his stocks, and it wasn't him.
But at one point during the investigation, attention shifted to another man, a man working at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, Dr. Bruce Ivans, who was 55 years old at the time. He had a Department of Defense security clearance and had co-authored articles on anthrax. Ivans appeared to be at the center of the government's investigation. He'd been questioned by the FBI and polygraphed. A declassified FBI report included comments attributed to Bruce Ivans where he, quote, spoke about the polygraph he took for the investigation and that he passed some questions but failed the one about taking stuff from work, end quote. In an email attributed to Ivans in 2007, he made reference to the, quote, grand jury sessions from hell, end quote. And in another message also from 2007, he reportedly said, quote, I've hit burnout, end quote. Things seemed to be closing in on Ivans. It appeared he was becoming unhinged. On July 9, 2008, he reportedly made a threat during a therapy session about killing co-workers. He also discussed suicide, claimed to have a bulletproof vest, and that he was going to get a Glock semi-automatic handgun. And he had a list of people he was going to kill. He said that he was tired of the investigation and that killing certain co-workers would take care of it. Reports say that Ivans was committed to a psychiatric facility around July 10th or 11th, 2008. The FBI searched Ivans' workplace, but we found nothing in the reports to indicate that anything illegal was found. One FBI report from that same year, June 2008, indicated that Ivans had already spent over $100,000 on an attorney, and that attorney reportedly told Ivans an indictment was coming, and to be prepared to face the death penalty. The FBI reported that Ivans took his own life on July 29, 2008. According to the Department of Justice, charges were likely coming for Bruce Ivans, but his suicide closed a chapter of the worst biological attack in U.S. history. Sadly, 5 deaths were linked to the anthrax letters, and several more were sickened. Thanks to the actions of Captain Bailor and his team, there were no deaths on Capitol Hill.
People were dying around the country. One of the reasons doctors don't know how to treat anthrax. They didn't even know what it was. It takes special training and not a lot, but it takes special training to recognize the signs and symptoms of anthrax because the signs and symptoms is just like an ordinary cold flu.
So more people may have died from anthrax, but if they were elderly or had weakened immune systems and they appeared to have flu-like symptoms, anthrax may not have been suspected. And the people that were being treated for anthrax exposure, they were being treated with a strong antibiotic called Cipro.
We don't know how many people died, but we had people got sick. And most of the people who got sick, because we were deconning people, most of the people got sick. You know what it was from? Cipro.
Without the preparation and planning that was done by the Capitol Police, the now retired Inspector Bailor says it could have been so much worse.
We were way at the forefront of this. We weren't by any means experts, but we were trained to handle this. One of the major things that I'm proud of in my career, not one person on Capitol Hill died.
Ed Bailor retired as an inspector in 2006 with 32 years of service with the Capitol Police. Since then, he's worked as a consultant for the government in developing the Personal Protective Equipment, or PPE, standard for handling WMDs. The Anthrax Task Force, which consisted of FBI, U.S. Postal inspectors, and other law enforcement partners, reported more than 10,000 witness interviews in the course of the investigation and 6,000 items of potential evidence. We'll never know exactly what was in the mind of Bruce Ivins when he allegedly sent the anthrax letters. Some believe that he wanted more attention on funding for anthrax research. Whatever the motive, this investigation resulted in new science that helps to identify a specific strain of a biohazard with forensic accuracy. If his intent was to paralyze our government, he failed, and the preparation and planning of the U.S. Capitol Police to respond to a WMD attack paid off. You heard the now retired Inspector Bailor say there were no lives lost at the Capitol despite the overwhelming contamination of a critical government office building. A special thanks to Ed Bailor, my colleague and classmate from the FBI National Academy, for sharing his story. This episode touches on the subject of suicide. If you or someone you know is experiencing thoughts of suicide, you can text 988 or contact the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. A link is available at apbcoldcase.com/resources. For more information about this episode, check out our show notes, pictures, and blog at apbcoldcase.com and click on APB Behind the Badge.
You're listening to APB Behind the Badge, an original Spawn Group production. Send your comments to APB Behind the Badge at spawngroup.com.